Hello, everyone, and welcome back. I've been talking about FTX and Alameda Research a ton recently, mostly over on the Crypto Critics Corner podcast. But the Financial Times, who has done some really good reporting on FTX, they were the ones who pointed out, for example, that Genesis Block was FTX integrated, Alameda Research owned, and was like the place where in Hong Kong where people were lined out outside with bags of cash they were exchanging for crypto, right? So the Financial Times has done a bunch of good reporting on FTX after the collapse, and they recently released a documentary called The Legend of Sam. And so today we're going to watch The Legend of Sam together, and we're going to see how this Financial Times documentary ended up. Where I can, I'll add in my commentary and knowledge, and after this is over, not before, you should check out the links in my bio where I have a link, one, to my channel's crypto podcast, which has all the crypto videos from this channel, all the crypto videos from Crypto Critics Corner, and all the times I've been on other people's channels to talk about cryptocurrency. You should also check out the playlist down there from Crypto Critics Corner with all of our videos on FTX and Alameda Research. Without further ado, and before Robert has any other issues, let's start taking a look at this documentary.
I did not know that there is any improper use of customer funds.
He did, though.
Everybody wanted to find the chosen one, the genius. That person was Sam Bankman-Fried, and the company that he ran was FTX.
FTX is a crypto exchange. Sam was the founder of FTX and the chief executive.
FTX grew in about 3 years, exploded onto the
Yeah, Larry got a nice payout from that, unlike, unsecured FTX creditors.
scene, had the backing of celebrities.
FTX is the safest and easiest way to buy and sell crypto. It's the best way to get in the game.
At the heart of this
Tom Brady and Giselle actually ended up not just taking a spokesperson deal and ended up investing their own money back into FTX. And so they probably could be actually creditors in this, which is funny because they could have, just taken the money and run. But Tom seems to have been a true believer in crypto.
You have an incestuous relationship between two companies that were supposed to be separate, FTX and Alameda.
There was so much alleged misuse of funds.
It all came crashing down in a matter of days.
When FTX collapsed, I ended up losing $2.1 million.
U.S. prosecutors say this is one of the biggest frauds in American financial history.
Regulators fell for it. Venture capitalists fell for it. Everyone fell for...
Financial journalists at Top Flight Financial Press fell for it.
The Legend of Sam. Sam Bankman-Fried, almost universally known as SBF or Sam, came from relative obscurity to king of the hill in crypto within just a few short years. He's the son of law professors.
He went to maths camp, he went to MIT, and then after graduating...
Listen, the LARP pictures are funny. But also, it contributes to kind of the perception of Sam Bankman-Fried, not as a 30-whatever-year-old man with years of experience in the financial industry, but as some child who's still playing around in a fantasy world. How is he supposed to understand the significance of what he was doing? And so I sometimes worry that focusing on the absurdity of Carolyn and Sam LARPing takes away from what were very serious crimes with actual victims, right? And also, I play Dungeons and Dragons. I'm a dungeon master. I once paid someone to teach me how to do LARP sword fighting. And that doesn't mean that that shouldn't take away from anything.
From MIT, he went to Jane Street, which is one of the world's biggest market makers, trading firms.
If you think of Sam Bankman-Fried, you think of curly, messy hair and cargo shorts.
He barely sleeps. He sleeps in the office. He sleeps on a beanbag.
People look for geniuses. They look for the key man. He was like Elon, like Zucker.
Yeah, he was a lot like Elon. Yeah, we'll just leave it at that for now.
Zuckerberg, he was just Sam. He was SBF.
He wasn't at Jane Street for very long. The phrase he used once was neutral but a waste of brain power. He went to work at the Center for Effective Altruism, like a think tank that encourages people to give away lots of their money in certain ways. He was working at the charity during the day and trading crypto all night.
He talks about how he wants to accumulate as much wealth as possible to distribute it to people who need it as fast as he can.
And that's where the idea for Alameda came from, that they were going to get into this market and use sort of traditional finance strategies.
The crux of effective altruism is an assumption that you particularly have insights that everyone else lacks. Because otherwise, or that you are like so far out on the curve on how much you would give away for someone who would earn that much, and that you have such unique ability to earn that much, and that the things you're going to give to are uniquely good. And like effective altruism, and we talked about this a little bit in an episode of Crypto Critics Corner, like as a concept, trying to do a lot of good is not a bad thing. The problem, especially with long-termists and like the earn to give effective altruists like Sam Bankman-Fried, is that it allows even philanthropy that hasn't happened, and in the case of Sam Bankman-Fried, philanthropy that will never happen now, serve as kind of a fig leaf that distracts from the actual activities that the person is engaging in. In this case, massive fraud, massive theft, political influence buying schemes using straw man donors, just so many other things that it draws attention away from in a sense.
Strategies to make a load of easy money in crypto.
In 2017, Sam founds Alameda Research, which was a proprietary trading firm and market maker.
Imagine it being founded in somebody's basement, 5 or 6 people, college roommates, old friends of Sam from math camp. The prices of cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin were different on different exchanges in different countries. If you bought in one and sold in another, you could make money for free because the market was inefficient.
Supposedly, this is where he made enough.
The market wasn't necessarily inefficient. Different countries have different capital controls, and what Sam Bankman-Fried seems to have engaged in first with the Japanese premium and then later with the Korean kimchi premium was trying to evade these laws and regulations about how capital was supposed to be legally flowing.
Money to get Alameda Research rolling.
Even at that point, there were people who thought that what they were doing was too risky.
Yeah, this was like their slide deck they passed around where they promised like 20% guaranteed returns on like a 1-year bond in exchange for this investment. And I think later they rolled a lot of those bond investors into like limited partners in the next fund structure they set up out of BVI instead of Hong Kong. But that gets really deep into the weeds on what they were doing here. But there was a slide deck from this period that passed around that even contemporaneously some people compared with a Ponzi scheme.
So one of their earliest investors walked away. FTX, which is a company that people have heard of, comes out of Alameda. It's basically the same team. 2019, they're talking about, hey, maybe we should found our own exchange.
FTX exploded into the mainstream.
I think we're pretty ambitious about FTX, and certainly we're aiming to become, the biggest crypto exchange.
Sports arena curse
2020
is really like a statistical myth, but it's still fun to point to the frauds who wasted their money on sports stadiums.
2021 was the year where FTX really burst onto the scene.
The wider crypto industry was also exploding into the mainstream.
Sylvia, we have not confirmed that he actually made money on most of the trades. There's actually some evidence to suggest that from pretty early on, Alameda needed the new outside investor money because they may not have been able to successfully play these arbitrages or thought they were successfully playing them until they ended up losing access to banking or something like that.
At the end of 2020, there was some institutional buy-in, a lot of interest in digital assets like Bitcoin.
It signed a sponsorship deal with Mercedes Formula One. It signed up Tom Brady and Gisele Bündchen.
It's not bad. This is big.
It commanded a mainstream awareness that perhaps no other exchange has enjoyed.
He's everywhere. And it's the one that you mention when you're talking about, well, there's a lot of quite sketchy shops out there in crypto. FTX is where they do things properly.
Not everyone said that. Some people said FTX looks like it's being basically dominated by Alameda Research, given preferential treatment, and there were people who said that too.
My name is Sunil Kavori. After graduating from university, I joined Deutsche Bank and worked at Morgan Stanley. Over 10 years ago, I left the city. I trade for my personal account as a retail investor. Since 2016 or so, I invested quite a bit into crypto. I had $6-7 million on FTX at the end of 2021. They were promoting it to retail investors and saying, if you want to get in crypto, the safest ways to get to crypto is use FTX.
July 2021, FTX closed a funding round of $900 million, which valued the company at the time at about $18 billion.
Within 2 or 3 years, this thing is supposedly worth $32 billion.
The company is worth more than Deutsche Bank was at the time. That is unbelievable.
Is it unbelievable, just considering the things Deutsche Bank has been involved in? Is it unbelievable another entity doing shady things would end up valued more than them? I mean, I can believe it, but it's also important to remember that, like, in this specific case with FTX and their investments here is, especially with their lead investor, Sequoia, they ended up doing a round trip investment where they basically took all the money Sequoia invested it and they invested it back into Sequoia to become limited partners of that fund. And so the actual exposure that Sequoia had, like, ended up being structured that, like, much smaller. And so because of that, because you've basically immediately diffused that risk, they can invest at a paper valuation that the business can't actually necessarily even really grow into because they've already made their money. It's kind of like when crypto VCs get a 90% discount in the seed round for a token. They don't really care what happens after that because it's all just free money. They got in at like such an advantageous deal that nothing after that really matters.
Investors were incredibly keen to get a piece of the crypto action. It seemed like the market was only going up.
It has investment from a whole bunch of huge names like Sequoia, like Paradigm, Temasek from Singapore. You've got SoftBank, Tiger Global. You've got the Ontario Teachers Pension Fund. Just these huge investors.
And BlackRock. I mean, a traditional finance who are very skeptical about crypto, they invest in FTX rather than Binance. So I thought the safest place.
Well, BlackRock picked FTX over Binance, so FTX must be safe. I mean, at least it's not Binance.
To park my money was obviously FTX.
Before you know it, he's making comments to the FT saying, oh yeah, at some point I'd quite like to buy Goldman Sachs.
And someone who heard those comments then just reported them as if it was a thing.
It's FTX. It's a safe and easy way to get into crypto.
I don't think so. And I'm never wrong about this stuff. Never.
One of the biggest highs for the exchange came in February 2022 when it managed to score a big Super Bowl ad.
I left my cane in there. What? What do you...
My understanding of Super Bowl ads, and Robert can correct me in the chat if I'm wrong, is that mostly what it takes to get a Super Bowl ad is enough money to buy the airtime and enough money to pay the firm that's going to actually make the ad for you. And so scoring it just feels like kind of a weird choice because forked over enough money to get this brief spot on TV is what mechanically happened.
Hey, that's an expensive cane!
Larry David was the star of the FTX ad.
And then in June, it also secured the naming rights to the Miami Heat NBA Stadium.
In some ways, what made Sam special was the mainstream acceptance that he got.
At one point, he was literally sharing a stage with Bill Clinton and Tony Blair. Something about Sam just drew.
The fact that he was sharing the stage with a sexual predator and a war criminal should have set off a lot more alarm bells for people than it did, perhaps, especially since both of those two, again, you just need to pay their fee and they'll show up. Them being there is not an endorsement except of the fact that you had enough money to pay their fee.
Drew in really intelligent people. So there's a really important stage in the narrative arc, if you like, for FTX around May 2022. There was a so-called stable coin and an associated crypto This Terra-Luna pairing that just unraveled in dramatic style.
And no one saw it coming.
It took down with it lending platforms in crypto, a bunch of trading platforms in crypto, and who was there to pick up the pieces? Sam Bankman-Fried.
FTX CEO Sam Bankman-Fried discussing his thought process behind offering crypto company bailouts, saying it's, quote, worth incinerating a small amount of money to keep crypto infrastructure going.
He was the lender.
Yeah, what motivation did Sam Bankman-Fried have to keep these things going? Did he have any unreported exposure that could have been problematic if it came out?
Of last resort and wealthy enough to be able to plug the gap when bits of the industry got themselves into trouble.
It only took a few months, come November, for everything to...
Anyone remember Binance's industry rescue fund? Have you heard about how they've invested all $2 billion of those dollars? Yeah, they won't tell me either.
come crashing down.
On the 2nd of November, CoinDesk raised questions about FTT.
Alameda was listing as an asset very, very large holdings of FTT, the token that is issued by FTX. They control the supply, the equivalent of counting your own stock as an asset on your balance sheet. FTT as a token is not widely held or traded. It's not like Bitcoin.
Alameda, the market making arm that is supposed to be separate from FTX, was holding over $5 billion worth of FTT token. That is a significant figure.
The relationship between Alameda Research and FTX might not be quite what everybody thinks it is. And a lot of the supposed assets that Alameda
I apologize for my silent frustration as I try to avoid screaming into the mic after the years I spent talking about these exchanges and these prop desks and market makers and their massive conflicts of interest, and got repeatedly told that, oh, it doesn't matter, everyone does it. The relationship, like the fact that FTX was born out of Alameda and that Alameda had this massive portion of the trading volume and the liquidity on FTX, was not a secret. And it wasn't even super hard to feel like you didn't have to look really hard to feel like FTX really liked listing coins that Alameda happened to own and need to sell. Wonder what was causing that? No one noticed that?
Alameda Research has on its books are actually tokens that are created by FTX out of thin air.
When the CoinDesk article came out, and obviously I feel really stupid now, so saying it, I wasn't too concerned. It focused on the Alameda balance sheet rather than FTX. FTX is an exchange whereby you trade assets. Alameda is a prop hedge fund, totally separate, and they trade their own balance.
What is Alameda? It's a prop desk, it's an over-the-counter trading desk, it's a banking thing, it's a hedge fund, it's a venture capital fund, it's a real estate development fund, it's a political giving fund, it's a bit of everything.
I mean, that's that's how it's supposed to be. I mean, why would I assume otherwise?
So there's various bits of lending going on here that are backed by these FTT tokens that are only worth something if we all kind of look around the room and agree that they're worth something, but actually they're worth absolutely nothing. They're like loyalty tokens for FTX. They enable you to trade on the platform and get certain discounts. Are they money? That's a huge assumption.
My name's Nicola White.
No, they're not money. They're a security or a pseudo-security, if you prefer.
I'm the CEO of B2C2, the principal at risk liquidity provider. We support the institutional trading of crypto, and we don't face retail investors. Our clients are the largest banks and trading firms globally. We had the opportunity to work with Alameda earlier in the year, which we had turned down. You know, we take a very conservative approach to risk, and they just didn't fit our risk profile.
I've been in crypto for too long because now when I hear we have a very conservative risk profile, my brain flags that as a red flag. It shoots up a little red flag in the back of my brain. And you would think it would have the opposite effect. Oh, good, they've got a risk profile. I'm like, oh, they're bragging about their risk profile. Why is that? Who are they reassuring? I didn't. And then I go deeper down that spiral. Well, anyways.
Just a few days later, enter stage right, CZ. Changpeng Zhao, he runs Binance, which is the other really big.
And he owns over 90% of Binance US and owns the firm that was used to transfer funds from Binance US to Binance. Just saying, I want to make sure everyone is clear on the fact that CZ owns the majority stake in all those.
Kind of global cryptocurrency exchange.
He tweets that he is going to be selling his holdings or Binance's holdings of the FTT token due to some recent revelations.
And the price of these tokens really starts cratering fast.
This really was the moment that caused widespread market panic.
And that sent the price of FTT absolutely plunging. I was just watching the graph and it was going further and further down.
Binance is one of the major holders other than FTX and Alameda themselves.
Binance is one of the major holders because in order for FTX to do their Series B1, they, before that, had to do a transaction where Alameda Research used a bunch of FTT token that they had gotten from FTX, exchanged that with a large sum of cash for the equity stake that Binance already had in FTX. And they did this because Binance was not complying with requests for information about Binance and Changpeng Zhao in Malta, where FTX was trying to get licensed. And so Alameda Research was the entity that was used to purchase back the original FTX equity owned by Binance from when they incubated it. And that because they didn't have enough cash to actually make that exchange, they used a bunch of FTT token in order to get it. And so Changpeng Zhao had that FTT token as like the stand-in, as a pseudo-security for the equity he used to own in FTX because it gave him this effective exposure because of the buy and burn mechanics. But he wasn't actually an equity holder then who would need to be reported to regulators and things like that. That's why FTT token was in play here. That's why the supply jumped up that massive amount at that period. That's why CZ had it and was able to take FTX and Alameda Research out having it because Alameda Research had to buy back the Binance equity in order to handle the 420 round for FTX. The more you know.
And we know from the balance sheet of Alameda that value of FTT is kind of integral to the whole financial structure of the Sam Bankman-Fried empire. Very quickly after, the CEO of Alameda, Caroline Ellison, came out and said, we'll buy it.
It kind of smelt a bit funny. Something's going on here. Why do they want to hold the FTT token at a certain level?
If they could keep FTT's price supported, then they wouldn't have to kind of accept that the value of their own assets were falling and that they were potentially insolvent. Then that failed.
Within just a few days, FTX is effectively running out of money.
This is a bank with nothing backing it. If you do not trust that your money is safe, it's very easy for a bank run to develop.
24 hours later on November 7, Sam tweets.
It's not possible for there to be a bank run on a properly run exchange. Exchanges are not banks. The bank run was able to develop because they had stolen billions of dollars in funds. Alameda Research could be the world's dumbest hedge fund in existence, and there's some evidence to suggest they are. But if they had not stolen billions of dollars in customer funds, their collapse could not have started a bank run because FTX would not have been runnable.
That FTX is fine and assets are fine.
He was saying right up to the very last minute, FTX was fine, or that FTX US was fine, or that, this is all just a big misunderstanding.
Insolvency rumors plaguing crypto exchange FTX are being denied by CEO Sam Bankman-Fried after a CoinDesk investigation revealed the balance sheet of FTX's sister company, Alameda Research, was loaded with FTX's native exchange token, FTT.
On November the 8th, CZ said that he was going to acquire FTX, which was just completely insane. You've got the head of the world's biggest crypto company saying that he's going to buy his rival's crypto company.
Sam is out in public trying to reassure people, and People had a lot of faith in FTX and Sam Bankman-Fried.
My name is Carol Alexander. I'm a crypto expert. I had a small portfolio of crypto so that I can teach the students what's happening on exchanges. My decision to put funds on FTX was just a personal connection of somebody who met Sam Bankman-Fried, and a lot of people recommended FTX. I first heard about the problems with FTX when I was out in Barcelona at the Quant Minds Congress. It's an annual summit for mathematical finance. Everybody there was really surprised. None of us thought it was going to be serious.
Only takes 24 hours, one day later, for CZ to have a look under the bonnet, look at the books, and actually decide that no, he's not going to buy FTX.
And meanwhile, inside the company, people would describe just total chaos. Employees are quitting left, right, and center. Sam is trying to kind of steer the sinking ship.
The events unfolded very, very quickly. We tried to withdraw some funds from the exchange, and those withdrawals weren't processed.
FTX suspends withdrawals, and in a memo to his employees, SBF says that they're trying to raise funds.
It was when he stopped withdrawals. That was the biggest thing. I thought, oh, shit, there's something.
I was standing on the deck of the Titanic, and I thought everything was going to be okay after we hit the iceberg. But then when I saw the ship tear in two, that was a major red flag for me.
Wrong here.
You have hedge funds, you have various market participants in crypto saying, yeah, Sam, can't get my money back here. I wasn't giving you this money. I was just trading through you. I didn't realize that you were going to take these funds away from me.
We had about 9 million of assets on FTX leading up to the time in which they suspended withdrawals. We felt comfortable that we could absorb the losses if one or two or three exchanges go down.
On the day that FTX, stopped paying back its customers, which is effectively the day it's collapsed, that morning, major sophisticated investors in crypto were still telling me, safe as houses, it cannot go down.
What was going through my mind was, first and foremost, how do we mitigate the risk to the firm? And then, secondly, what are the knock-on effects for the market, right? People having their cash tied up at FTX meant, they weren't in the same financial position as they might have been.
I ended up losing $2.1 million US. Yeah.
I think Sam probably still thought that FTX could be salvaged, but...
Oh, he absolutely did. Sam still thinks that if these cops would just get out of his way, he could raise $8 billion and fix this all in a week. He's really upset that no one's giving him a week.
Of course, he was wrong. FTX files for bankruptcy in New York, and Sam resigns as chief executive.
I've never seen anything unravel in that sort of space of time before.
It's had a significant effect on my life. I couldn't sleep and eat properly for at least few weeks. It was just basically stolen overnight. It's been difficult.
On November the 12th, there are reports that at least $1 billion worth of FTX's customer money has disappeared. Since then, that number has grown. There's an alleged $8 billion hole of customer money that is just missing, unaccounted for.
I don't think
I think the official tally is like 8.9 billion at this point.
We've given up on the possibility of getting funds back, but we have written them down from an accounting perspective.
I filed a class action lawsuit, so I was the lead plaintiff, the international plaintiff.
Oh, the FTX crash was devastating for me. Ride with me in my Maserati and I'll tell you about it.
Against all the people who profited and enabled the alleged fraud, the celebrity promoters, I felt that I had to do something. Thankfully, I've had a supportive wife, and it kept me going. Mentally, I've been probably more difficult, I would say.
After FTX files for bankruptcy, Sam is still in the Bahamas, where he lives and where he was running FTX from. He started to tweet a lot.
He's out here tweeting long threads trying to explain what happened and how desperately he's trying to work to get customers' money back and how sorry he is.
All the talk online is, when are they going to arrest this guy? But in this intervening period, Sam Bankman-Fried hits the media circuit hard.
After apologizing profusely on Twitter, he talks to the New York Times, he talks to Good Morning America.
I did not know that there is any improper use of customer funds.
He eventually talks to the FT as well.
His message is absolutely consistent. He says over and over again, I fucked up, and I'm really sorry, and I didn't mean to do anything fraudulent. Have I done something fraudulent? I didn't mean to do anything fraudulent. You can just imagine his lawyers just tearing their hair out like, please, Sam, for the love of God, will you shut up and stop talking to journalists?
There were a number of things I was paying close attention to in terms of trading volume and revenue and liquidity. I wasn't in terms of balances or positional risk.
Sam gave us an interview shortly before he was arrested. He said to me, okay, how about 3 o'clock in the morning?
Think you would necessarily...
He starts out sitting looking normal at a camera, but he's always moving. He's kind of shifting around. The camera angle's changing. He's moving his laptop. He's giving this interview from his bed. You would ask him questions that, you would think are pretty straightforward. Every answer starts with, I'm not sure, I don't have access to this, I don't have access to that.
Let me take a step back. There may be discussions I don't know about. I do remember that there were some discussions around Alameda's position. I don't remember numbers from those. I don't remember numbers being...
You can't expect me to remember things like numbers. All I did was develop the automated trading system for mortgage ETFs at Jane Street that worked even when the markets weren't active. How am I supposed to remember things like the position of the market maker I own and am using to bank my exchange? That's too much for me.
Being said, I'm not sure they weren't. Yeah, I think that's all I got.
He was trying to manage the FTX narrative in a way that really put his apology at the forefront.
But at no point is he saying this was fraud or this was on purpose. It's just one big mistake. It's just one huge misunderstanding.
This is just not how anybody ever behaves when they are in the kind of legal position that Sam was. You do not talk to the press, and any lawyer would tell you that.
Seriously, don't talk to the press and never talk to the police without your lawyer present.
Finally, on December the 12th, Sam Bankman-Fried is arrested in the Bahamas. Initially, he resists extradition.
The conditions in the jail of the Bahamas are notoriously difficult.
He didn't really want to be extradited to the United States, but I think after a short period in jail in the Bahamas, that idea became a little bit more appealing to him.
He was flown to the U.S.
Come on. You got it, Sam.
He appeared before a judge. He's pleaded not guilty.
They raise a $250 million bail.
In a case as complex as Sam Bankman-Fried's, often you're not even allowed to plead guilty at the initial hearing, just because of the overall number of things involved. And so he kind of had to plead not guilty. Even if he's intending to try to strike some kind of plea deal where he will plead guilty, he has to start out pleading not guilty.
Bail for him to effectively go and sit in his parents' house in California for as long as it takes until this goes to trial.
He is charged with 8 counts by the Southern District of New York, which includes wire fraud, conspiracy
12 counts now.
To commit wire fraud, campaign finance violations.
The SEC and the CFTC, who are 2 major regulators in the States, have also brought charges against Sam. But there is a future where Sam potentially spends the rest of his life in prison. This company is really unlike any other.
FTX didn't have a board. There were no adults in the room. There was no one overseeing what was going on inside.
No risk management procedures that didn't have the corporate structure perhaps people would conventionally imagine.
The whole empire, including Alameda and the various arms of FTX, were all kind of being run from a very small inner circle of people close to Sam Bankman.
They're just being, I feel like they're just being mean in those drawings of the inner circle for FTX. Those are not flattering sketches.
Fried.
Right in the middle of the circle is SBF, and he ran the show.
Then you've got Caroline Ellison, who was chief executive of Alameda Research.
SBF and Caroline had an alleged on-off romantic relationship for many months. They shared the same penthouse apartment in the Bahamas, lived together, worked together, were super, super close.
She has since resigned and pleaded guilty to fraud charges and is cooperating with law enforcement in the States.
And then you've got Sam Trabucco, who was the co-head of Alameda Research alongside Caroline until the summer when he resigned. And he ran the trading strategies at Alameda for a while.
And you then have Gary Wang, Chief Technology Officer and co-founder of not only FTX, but also Alameda Research. This, speaks to the incestuousness, essentially, of both companies that were meant to be separate.
And him and Sam go way back. They went to maths camp together, and then they were also college roommates when they were both at MIT.
Gary Wang is also cooperating with law enforcement in the States after pleading guilty to fraud charges.
And then you've got Nishad Singh, who was also very close to SBF.
He shared multiple apartments with Sam. Again, this speaks to the fact that both Alameda and FTX, which were meant to be separate companies, really in many ways weren't.
They lived together, they ate together.
Sam Trabucco is currently going fast over the water, and that's all he can legally say.
They did whatever else it is together. Everything was financed through FTX, the fast food, the grocery deliveries.
When I was in the Bahamas, I spoke to a person who worked for a food delivery company, and they'd be ordering maybe $500 worth of takeout every night.
It was just sort of free-flowing money, getting Amazon packages flown in from Miami, nights out and beach resorts.
If you're a nerd and you're working with a bunch of other nerds and you're changing the world through sheer nerdery, you feel pretty powerful.
No one outside the inner circle knew really what was going on. There was only a handful, maybe 5 or 6 people at the top who knew the inner workings of FTX and Alameda and the crossover there.
Everything that happened with FTX and Sam really highlights the need for a distributed management structure. No one person should be able to make every decision about a company. And also there should be multiple layers of governance within a company.
It's not just crypto traders, large and small, that have lost. Venture capital firms, professional investors that had helped get FTX off the ground have had to write down their investments, some of them worth, hundreds of millions of dollars, down to a big fat zero. The one that everyone thinks of is Sequoia Capital. There are VC firms and there are VC firms. Sequoia is a very serious VC firm, and it went to the effort of posting on its website an article running to 13,800 words talking about what a genius Sam is, how he has the status of legend. All of these venture capital investors say, look, we're as surprised as everybody. We did the due diligence on FTX.
No, you didn't.
How?
There's a great attraction for big institutions to go into crypto, although it's high risk. It can be very high returns, particularly when the odds are stuck in your favor. Their balance sheets are so large that they can afford.
There's a lot of cases in cryptocurrency history of people who theoretically should have had the odds stacked in their favor, who somehow end up losing, frankly, absurd amounts of money in ways people have never even imagined before. I think there's a lot less money to be made in crypto than people imagine because so much of it is extractive zero-sum games. And so there's this idea of money and there's often the appearance of money, but there seems to not actually be the money.
To take risks. They don't need to do the due diligence. They just need to get in there early.
They write down the investment. The people who get hurt are the retail investors. You can't write down, I mean, I'm going to write down $2.1 million, okay? And then the other guy is like, come on.
Many institutional investors, parked due diligence, essentially, over FOMO.
The fear of not being part of this new technology, people are calling it like the new internet. That probably propelled some of these investors to not look deep enough and just say, hey, take my money.
It's also possible, some investors were turned away because they were asking questions that FTX didn't want to answer. When you have a lineup around the block of other...
This does actually happen in crypto. I've heard from VCs cases where they tried to do additional due diligence into companies and the company basically said, never mind, you're out of our round, and just moved on. Or the companies are trying to close their rounds in such a short period of time, like we need commitment by tomorrow in 48 hours, whatever, that it's not reasonably possible for the VC fund to do serious investing. And because in these crypto deals especially, they're often getting at least part of it in heavily discounted coins, it can often make the economics make sense, even if they're unsure about many facets of the business.
Investors who are ready to write your check today You don't need to go with the investor who's asking difficult questions.
One big VC investor, Shamath Palihapitiya, says that he was approached about putting some money to work in FTX. And he said, okay, look, this is interesting. There's a few things we'd want you to do differently. We'd want you to have a board. We'd want you to have some sort of oversight. And he says the response from FTX was, quote, go fuck yourself. Backing from really big name venture capital firms, really big name investors really matters because it pulls in other people. It pulls in the hedge funds. It pulls in the retail traders.
FTX's auditors were not in the big four, but they were Armanino and Prager Metis in the US, and Armanino is one of the top 20 accounting firms in the US by revenue. And
Prager Metis was the first auditing firm in the metaverse, which is equally as important.
The fact that they didn't catch on to any of this, it just shows a complete failure.
Auditing crypto is really difficult. You have various tokens that are worth whatever it is the company says that they're worth. You know, the big name auditors are generally too nervous to get involved in this space.
It's really incumbent on these crypto exchanges and these other crypto companies to convince big-time auditors that they should lend their legitimacy to these companies. And, you know, until that happens, these legacy issues of transparency and safety of customer funds, they're going to persist.
We have filled out more due diligence questionnaires in the last 10 weeks than probably we did in the year before that. But I think that's a really good thing, right? I think it's really good that the counterparties and the clients that we're facing are diving into details. They're understanding the risks that they're taking. We really need to work to build up that level of trust back in the industry. But I'm very, encouraged by the fact that people are taking the time to do it.
There's also the question of regulation with crypto. Regulators don't know entirely how and what to do with it, how to classify it.
Unfortunately, it's taken a catastrophic collapse of one of the biggest companies in the industry to prompt regulators to start thinking seriously about what they should do to protect consumers.
It shouldn't be forgotten that FTX...
But it has given regulators serious permission to basically do whatever they want to crypto. The crypto has way fewer defenders and a lot less mugwumps.
We're very close to getting CFTC regulation. They'd applied, they had an excellent margin model that took account of very high margin requirements and were not going to allow their customers 100 times leverage. Binance even offers 125 times leverage on some products in some jurisdictions. So FTX was a completely different animal. This is FTX US to Binance.
FTX International, which is the main part of the business, it's much bigger than the US business, and is where the problems seem to have come from, along with Alameda, is based in the Bahamas, which has a tailor-made regulatory regime that they rolled out for digital assets.
They see this industry that's booming, and they don't want to miss out.
It's just not the kind of thing that could happen if these companies were being regulated as tightly as companies that perform equivalent functions in major financial markets.
Regulators are so far behind. There's a lack of knowledge and a lack of resources. These exchanges, they call themselves self-regulated, which basically means not regulated at all. There will come a time when regulators eventually get their act together and they stop platforms like Binance operating as shadow banks, their own blockchain, NFT marketplaces, limit order books, brokerage, custody, and clearing and settlements. I mean, how do you regulate something like that? It's got to stop.
We want to partner with regulators to create a framework that is fit for purpose for crypto and digital assets. Having worked in traditional finance for a fairly long period of time, I think it's important that we don't try to...
The last framework that seemed to actually get like some kind of serious traction was the DCCPA, which would be Sam Bankman-Fried's bill that he was trying to force through using his political influence buying scheme that had fundamental misunderstandings of how cryptocurrencies operate built into the bill itself, making many of its limitations absolutely meaningless. Just saying.
Pigeonhole crypto and digital assets into that existing regulatory framework.
And I made those observations about the DCCPA before the collapse of FTX.
Framework.
As soon as you regulate something, just like with the venture capital firms, that is, boom, stamp of approval. This thing has some sort of regulatory oversight. It's safe. I can put my money to work here.
The only people who can put their money to work in venture capital funds are accredited investors.
That's not a kind of indemnity that regulators and governments have wanted to give to crypto.
Sam was really at the forefront of lobbying Democrats in the US, talking to regulators and lobbying them to change the crypto regulatory landscape.
The money that was flowing into FTX, some of this money has ended up as political donations.
1 in 3 members of Congress receive donations from FTX executives or FTX firms.
A lot of this is to the Democratic Party, and so...
No! Yes, a lot of it was to the Democratic Party, but the entire point of the scheme is that Sam was going to try to occupy the juicy middle where he wasn't partisan, he's a little more Democrat than Republican, but look at him, he differs with the Democratic Party in these ways, and Nishad Singh was going to be the more leftist candidate who could go a little further out to the left, and then Ryan Salami was going to be the right candidate who could take up that whole side because he was willing to take that hit. Sam Bankman-Fried couldn't support the Republicans, not because he didn't want to try to buy influence from them, but because he was worried about how it would affect his reputation.
One of the big lines that people throw about is, well, you know, obviously Congress never looked properly into FTX because he was pumping money into the Democrats. Turns out the firm was also pumping money into the Republicans.
So a lot of folks saw what Sam was doing and accused him effectively of trying to lobby not for crypto's interests in Washington, but for FTX's and Sam's interests.
U.S. prosecutors say this is one of the biggest frauds in American financial history.
The most insane alleged fraud to have taken place, blowing Enron and others out of the water.
The failure of FTX hasn't really affected the price of Bitcoin. People will cling onto these coins for dear life.
People in the crypto industry say it's just an FTX problem, it's an SBF problem.
This is a crypto issue. It's not just an FTX issue. Sam was the poster child of this crypto industry.
Personally, I'm just taking a break. People who want to invest, I don't see why they should stop.
What's happened to FTX tells you that the infrastructure here that's built on top of an asset, which, to be clear, has an intrinsic value of 0, is incredibly shaky. If FTX can disappear in a fortnight, then any of them can.
2023 is going to be a year where the crypto industry writ large and many chief executives of big crypto companies are going to have to deal with regulatory scrutiny that perhaps they wouldn't have had to have dealt with if it wasn't for FTX's collapse in November.
This is a cautionary tale for investors who were jumping into FTX for fear of missing out. You have to do due diligence first and foremost. You have to check what's going on.
The message of FTX is not primarily that retail investors need to be doing that level of due diligence, because it's not a reasonable expectation that retail investors are able to and capable of doing the level of due diligence that would go into identifying something as FTX as blatantly fraudulent. I studied these things for years, right? And there's still people who were trying to tell me that right up until the moments of the collapse that FTX was going to be fine. The reason we need the reason we need a regulatory framework and some of those regulator protections is because by giving it that stamp of somewhat indemnification, as Katie Martin referred to it as, you also give the government somewhat of a moral responsibility and a political need to then step in and try to make sure there's fewer of these blatant frauds and scams. Because now people will look at their leaders, ideally, this is an idealized model, the way our actual politics work is broken in a multifaceted manner. But the idea would be that then when people see this thing that they were led to believe had some amount of safety because it was regulated, they can look to the regulators to understand why it might have failed. And the regulators have a responsibility then to try to clean up the failure of their mess. Expecting investors to be able to look at something like FTX and know that this is not a safe thing is bordering on victim blaming.
Crypto bros have been able to say, it's just FUD. Fear, uncertainty, doubt, just ignore it. Turns out everyone needed a whole lot more FUD.
Sam, what he's trying to do is say this was all an accident, and what prosecutors will try and pin him on is that this is fraud.
Sam, how you doing? Come on, guys. Guys, I gotta get...
Well, that was okay. Now someone in my chat, it just didn't really feel like they did a great job of grappling with some of the things that actually led to this and didn't adequately connect it to the fact that, like, FTX is not that unique. Alameda Research is not that unique. Many of these exchanges have run prop tests, have run market maker firms. Binance still seems to be doing that. And so, like, I wish there was a little bit more of a grappling with the fact that the things that caused this massive problem and all these people to get hurt still exist. And it feels a little bit like they weren't. And so that's a little bit disappointing. And as I'm sure Robert is saying in the chat right now, there's also a bit of this tension with the fact that, like, the reason Sam Bankman-Fried had this reputation in this position was in part because he had been led there by the financial press and placed in this position, and his treatment and, like, him saying things like, oh yeah, I'm gonna buy Goldman or whatever, was treated as if this was a thing he could actually do, was a thing that was within the realm of possibility. So it was a little disappointing in that regards, but I mean, hey, someone with very little information about FTX and Alameda Research coming in and watching this 30-minute program would have some ideas about what happened broadly. It was a reasonably good timeline. But it does still kind of feel like it failed to grapple with the fundamental criminality, the fact that the criminality existed from the very beginning, and just the overall scale and pervasiveness of this in cryptocurrency broadly and not just in FTX. I think that's all I have to say about this. I'm pretty proud of the last few videos I've made on this channel, so check those out if you're looking for something to watch. Make sure to like this video. Like I said, linked in the description, I've got my crypto playlist, which has all the crypto videos I've done, and I've got a link to the Crypto Critics Corner playlist with all the FTX and Alameda Research videos we've done. If you've got interest in, like, really detailed looks at what went down with FTX and Alameda Research, those are going to be great. I did another reaction video a little bit like this a few months ago where I reacted to Coinage Media's interview of Do Kwon, so another look at a fraudster. If you enjoyed this, you may enjoy that. And thank you all for tuning in and hanging out with me for this hour.